Good day, Mang, and good day, classmates. I am Patricia Sabatin, and I will be the one to report about writing objectives from competency. So, what is the definition and what is the purpose of writing objectives from competency? So, writing objectives from competency first. Objectives are specific results that a teacher aims to achieve within a time frame and with available resources. So how should your objectives be stated? So your objectives should be stated using action verbs that are specific enough to be measured. Like for example, to compare, to calculate, to assess, to determine, to verify, and to calculate, to describe, and to explain, and etc. So, itong mga words na to, ito yung magandang ilagay kapag gumagawa ng objectives para mas maintindihan din ng mga bata kung ano ang gusto mong iparating sa kanila. So, next is, well-stated objectives helps teachers clarify what they want their students to learn. So, kung mas maintindihan natin, ibig sabihin lang neto, kung magagawa mo ng maganda or pagka-state ng objectives mo, makakatulong din ito sa atin para mas maklarify natin kung ano ang gusto nating iparating sa estudyante natin or kung ano ang gusto nating ituro sa kanila para mas maintindihan talaga nila. Next is using objectives, teachers can evaluate whether their students have learned and whether their own teaching has worked. So, kapag yung objectives natin kapag yung objectives natin ay maganda, ibig sabihin, maganda rin yung kalalabasan. Kapag yung teaching strategy natin maganda, maganda rin yung kalalabasan nito sa mga estudyante. So, ibig sabihin, meron silang maiintindihan sa lesson na ginawa mo. Kasi yung objectives na binigay mo or yung objectives na pinaliwanag mo sa kanila, ibig sabihin, naiintindihan nila and na pumapasok sa utak nila yung mga sinasabi mo. That's objectives. Kapag yung objectives natin ay proper na pagkagawa and naiintindihan ng mga estudyante. So now, let's go to the process. So there are 4 major steps in writing objectives from competency. First, decide on the learning outcomes. So, learning outcomes are any measurable skills, abilities, knowledge, or values that the students demonstrate as a result of completing a given course or class. So, effective learning outcomes can be articulated as several levels, including lessons, course, program, degree, etc. So, it is completely student-oriented and describes what both the students have to learn and what the instructor will teach. So, that is the first major steps in writing objectives from competency. Secondly is break down the general outcomes into more specific objectives. So, learning outcomes are measurable achievements that the learner will be able to understand after the learning is complete. So, it can help also to learners understand the importance or what is the importance of the information and what they will gain from their engagement with the learning activity. So, in creating a clear objectives or outcomes, learning outcomes, it is actionable learning outcomes. It is a very important part of creation of training programs in organizations. So, when we developing these programs, both management and instructors need to be clear about what learners should understand after completing their learning path. The most useful learning outcomes include a verb that describes an observable action, a description of what the learner will be able to do and under which conditions they will be able to do it. So, and the performance level they should be able to reach. Next is figure out how we'll assess the outcomes or what your evidence you will be accepted that the students have achieved the understanding. So, assessment methods should help the instructor answer the questions. So, how do I know the required learning has taken place? So, what I might need to modify about the course to best support students' learning. Information about student learning can be assessed through both direct and indirect measures. So, measures, it may include homework, quizzes, exams, reports, essays, research project, case studies, analysis, and rubrics for oral and other performances. So, example of indirect is it includes course evaluation, student surveys, course enrollment, information retention in the major, alumni surveys, and graduate school placement rates. So that's the third one. The last one is plan the lessons and activities that will help students achieve those outcomes. So in terms of planning objectives or doing objectives, kailangan nating maging isang matalino kung ano talaga ang nais natin iparating sa mga estudyante para ang kalalabasan ng paggawa ng objectives mo ay matupad kung ano talaga yung nais mong ituro sa kanila. Now, let's go to the difference between standards, goals, and objectives. So, first is specificity. Objectives are specific. The quality or the condition of being specific. To accomplish a goal, an objective is a specific, doable target that must be attained in a shorter amount of time, usually a year or less. So, goal-achieving actions or activities are described in objectives. Next is standards include more general outcome statements. Outcomes are precise, quantifiable statements that indicate when a goal has been attained. So, outcomes state a specific modification in your knowledge, attitude, and skills. It can help you to achieve your goals. Good outcome statements are those that include both behaviors you expect to see as a result of your action and definite, quantifiable, and practical. The last one is goals can be general or specific. So it means that goals ay broad, and this is general statements of what you want your student to learn. These are larger, overarching description of outcomes for which verbs like appreciate and understand are appropriate. A sample course goal might be, students will understand the effect of global warming. So that's the difference between standard, goals, and objectives. Next is long-term or short-term. Now, in short-term, goal is something you wish that accomplish in the near future or to accomplish in the near future. Sabi nga dito, mag-achieve lang ang short term within this week or this year. So, like for example, you can set a career goal like completing a skill enhancement, or in short term saving goal like setting aside money for an emergency fund. That's short term. While in long term is something that you wish to complete in the distant future and takes more time, planning, and patience. So you can't do them in a few weeks and dust off your hands. You might need 10 years. For example, your long-term goal can be set up your own business, a savings goal for your retirement account, and etc. Long-term goals can seem overwhelming or even impossible at times, but when you follow through on each short-term goal. Along the way, you'll eventually get there. So next one is the uses. Objectives are used lesson and activity plans. Goals are also found in units of instruction. Standards are used in state or district curricula or on set by professional organizations. So, good lessons must be planned. Planning help us to make our lessons clear and well-timed, meaning that the students will be active and interested. So in effective planning, it also includes some built-in flexibility so that teachers can respond to what they find out about their students learning as they teach. So working on a plan for a series of lessons involves knowing the students and their prior learning, what it means to progress through the curriculum, and finding the best resources and activities to help students learn. So planning is continual process to help us to prepare both individual lesson as well as a unit of lessons. So each one building on the last. There are stages of lesson planning. So we need to be clear about what our students or what your students need in order to make a progress. Secondly, deciding how you are going to teach in a way that students will understand and how to maintain flexibility to respond to what you find. And the last one is try to look back on how well the lesson went and what your students have learned in order to plan for the future. Now, let's go to the 4 components of objectives. But first, how to set a clear corporate objectives. In corporate learning objectives are what a learner will learn, understand, and be in a position to perform as a result of taking part in a learning process. So, properly written learning objectives are critical to any given learning process. They guide how the learning activities are made and the choice of learning materials, among other things. So it can help us provide clarity about the purpose of the training program, guide the formulation and development of the appropriate curriculum, content, and teaching methods. It can help us also develop accountability between the instructors and the learners. Once you have set the goals and scope of a corporate training program, it is important to define specific information, attitude, knowledge, and skills to be attained by the participants in the program. This form of the basis for the objective, the training program. To set clear learning objective, it is important to understand what objectives made up of. So let's go to the 4 components objective. Now, first is the content. So, the content is the component describes the specific subject matter to be learned. Teachers should be specific enough that anyone reading the objective will understand the subject matter. Teachers should be general enough that the emphasis is on knowledge and skills that are important. Learning objectives should always specify the audience they are intended to serve. Usually, the audiences are participants in a given training program. So, for example, in the praise, learning will be able. The learners are the audience. Although there may be different groups or of participants in a training program, such as learners, instructors, supervisors, facilitators, but the objective should be describe the exact intended audience. So this helps us in making objectives become measurable. Next one is the behavior. So in the behavior, this component states what students will do to demonstrate their learning. In behavior is very observable actions that are supposed to be accomplished by the end of the training session or program and should be demonstrated during the program. So to write a clear learning objective, it is important to carefully choose the most appropriate word that describes the behavior displayed by the participants in a program after training is done. So the action verb that forms part of your objective should be able to fully describe the specific behavior that is expected from a participant after undergoing a training program. For example, in a behavior, example of action verbs that you might use include explain, identify, analyze, list, code, and present, and among others, etc. These verbs are the most important part of any learning objective. This is because they identify what has achieved by the end of the training program and presumably what they are ready to perform moving forward. So it is therefore important to avoid general verbs such as know and understand, as they may not be measurable and thus present a lot of problems when it comes to assessing the effectiveness of training program. For instance, it is better to have an objective that says learners will be able to list important markets for electronic products rather than learners will know the important markets for electronic products. Now, in standards, learning objectives should identify to what standards a given skill or knowledge must be achieved by the learner. In other words, the standards used in objectives give the proficiency to which the training will elicit in the learners. It is therefore important for us to give a specific of how a learner will be able to perform a given task in terms of quality and quantity after undergoing a given training program. For example, in the objective, the learners should be able to identify 95% of errors. The phrase 95% of errors is called standards. It is the standards. The last one is a condition. A condition in an objective specifies the condition under which given task should be performed. So these are the actual conditions a given task or should take place. So the conditions, it may be include time and place. So an example of a condition is an objective is after this program, the learners should be able to take less than 5 minutes in successfully predicting the performance of a given stock. Here in the phrase, less than 5 minutes, it represents the condition. Now, let's go to the definition of competency. So, a competency is the capability to apply or use a set of related knowledge, skills, and abilities required to successfully perform critical work functions or tasks in a defined work setting. So, for example of that is in the business awareness, customer orientation, and also analysis or problem solving, and etc. Now, what is the difference between a competency and learning objectives? So, learning objectives should be specific, measurable statements and written in a behavioral terms. In short, objectives say what we want the learners to know, and the competencies say how we can be certain they know it. It is the simplest form. A competency is defined as the set of attitudes, skills, and knowledge. On the other hand, a learning objectives is essentially a specific statement or written written or oral, which describes what would the learner learn to do or not to do. In a, for example, in a training program which may have multiple components, it may aim to help us or help a learner gain a competency. So the learning objectives of this program, of that program, would be statements to create boundaries around what would be taught, explored, or discussed. And that's all, ma'am, for the writing objectives from competency. Thank you.